Okay. So I appreciate your patience as we haven't had Jews in the news in a couple of weeks, and for being willing to hop on whenever I say that I can have a session. And I thought today that we'd spend some time, see how far we get, talking about artificial intelligence. What prompted me to think about this is the latest iteration of artificial intelligence is with an app called ChatGPT. So I've heard about this app from my wife, who is an administrator at the Charles E. Smith Jewish Day School. And because she's an administrator, the leadership team meets regularly to discuss issues both in the upper school, the high school, and also in the lower school. So in the upper school, ChatGPT is an issue in that you can use this app to write an essay for you. So if you're given a homework assignment in your English class on Hamlet, let's say, you can ask ChatGPT to write an essay giving certain parameters, and it will write an essay for you. And you can submit that essay. And theoretically, you would get an A on it, because why else would you want to download an app if not to get an A on a project? So the question for schools now, are students allowed to use this ChatGPT? Now, it's interesting that this has a synagogue application as well, in that you may have seen this on the forward, that there's a rabbi who used ChatGPT to write a Shabbat sermon. And he gave that Shabbat sermon that was written for him on ChatGPT, and he reports that he got a round of applause after giving the sermon, and then saying, "I didn't write it, ChatGPT wrote it." So Ira Kohlmeister, who is our Zoom co-host on Shabbat morning and technology person, asked me about this and shared the article about the rabbi and the ChatGPT sermon. So I downloaded the app, and you have to pay for it. Just one second, please. My parents are calling. Okay, so the app is free, but and only allows 400 words. So I could write my monthly newsletter article for free, but I'm not going to pay more than that. So this is what happens. This is what happens when you press on ChatGPT after you've downloaded it. Hi, just ask me about any topic you wish and give me specific requirements. Here's a good prompt example. Please write an essay on capitalism versus communism. Focus on geopolitical aspects. Write in the style of Edgar Allan Poe. Add a couple of old Soviet jokes. So this is, or here's another one. Please write a marketing plan for my new pet hostel business. Choose a target audience, develop key messages and slogans, select the media channels for promotion, suggest 10 names, and give tips to reach my goal of becoming successful. And apparently ChatGPT can do this for you. Ira also told me that you can ask the chat to write code for a website. So behind the scenes of what makes the internet works is lots of coding. And there are people who get paid a lot of money to write code to allow websites to work. So apparently you can use ChatGPT to write code for you, which raises even more questions. Not only do synagogues need rabbis anymore if ChatGPT can write sermons, and theoretically they can write eulogies also and wedding talks, but would companies need to hire people who go to college to get certified in some other way in code writing to actually write the code, or can just some executive sitting around the boardroom table just write in the code that is necessary? So all of this leads to it raises ethical questions, and even more so as we step back from it, not just to focus very narrowly and specifically on ChatGPT, but just broadly about artificial intelligence. Questions arise about self-driving cars, right? So as artificial intelligence is used in the software for Tesla and other manufacturers like that, who create, there's self-assist in these cars, right? That you may have seen commercials for cars that can parallel park for you while you're sitting in the car, right? So that involves some artificial intelligence doing that for you. But they're working on cars driving automatically, whether you're behind the wheel or not. In other words, you can, for lots of cars today, electric cars mostly, you can tell it drive now, and you can let the car take over. There's one thing to have cruise control, right? If you're going cruising on the highway, you can set it at 60, and then it drives for you. You can take your foot off the pedal, and it keeps it at 60, to even more intensive driving assist, where you can take your hands off the wheel and it'll stay in the lane for you, to just driving the car all by itself without having a human being or needing a human being behind the wheel. It has ramifications for taxi driving services, for trucks, for deliveries. You can use this for trains. You can use this for ferry boats and other aspects of ships. For airplanes, autopilot, right? The pilots who are flying the airplanes often put the plane in autopilot mode. So these are just some of many aspects of artificial intelligence. And so when I want to look for a Jewish perspective on a particular topic, my go-to is to first check the law committee of the conservative movement. So the acronym is CJLS, Conservative Jewish, the conservative. Yes, what does that stand? I'm trying to think now what it stands for. The Committee on Jewish Law and Standards. That's what CJLS stands for. And it is a committee that has been around in the conservative movement for 80 years at least, appointed by people who sit on the committee are appointed by the Rabbinical Assembly, that is the Organization of Conservative Rabbis, and by United Synagogue, which is the Organization of Conservative Movement Synagogues. They are mainly people who have proficiency in aspects of Jewish law. So about 25 people sit on the committee, and they deliberate issues that come before the committee, questions that come before them. from the mundane, like whether swordfish is a kosher fish, to more serious issues like, can you use Zoom on Shabbat, which was a question that was hurriedly dealt with by the committee 3 years ago when the COVID pandemic hit. And there are even broader subjects like artificial intelligence. So I want to share my screen, and here we go. And this is what a paper looks like. And if you want, you can email me, and I can send you. This is accessible to all people. I can send you the link for this if you want to read this on your own. These papers are meant for people to read who have experience reading papers that discuss Jewish law. So it's not written for the layman, ha ha ha. It's written for the educated layman. Okay, so though anybody can just access the Rabbinical Assembly website and look for the what's called responsa. That's the official name for a question that is asked of a rabbi, and the rabbi answers in a official way with in terms of a Jewish legal answer. So the Jewish legal question followed by the Jewish legal answer is called a response. And there's a whole body of responsa literature, beginning with, for example, a Jew in the nascent Muslim empire asks the chief rabbi of the Muslim empire back in Baghdad, what are the prayers that I'm supposed to recite over the course of the day? And Rabbi Amram answers with a prayer book. And that's one of the first full editions of a prayer book that we have, and it's from around the 800s. Okay, so that's just one example of many of responsa literature. If you just Google Jewish responsa literature, I'm sure a Wikipedia article will come up, and a whole variety of other things like that. So the conservative movement at its core is a halachic movement, right? It's that is how we define ourselves in our branch of Judaism, in that halacha, Jewish law, is part and parcel of what it means to be Jewish. Okay, whereas in other denominations, it might not be the case. So if you allow me this tangent for a moment, the Reform movement, for example, does not hold by Jewish law as part of the identity of what it means to be a Reform Jew. It leaves Jewish law up to each individual choice. So each individual Reform Jew can decide on their own if they want to keep kosher or not, and rabbis can decide if they want to keep kosher or not. Synagogues can decide if they want to keep kosher or not. So Jewish law is a choice in the Reform movement. In the Reconstructionist movement, officially Reconstructing Judaism is what it's called now, Jewish law is seen more as Jewish customs that are developed and change over time. So it doesn't have the impact of law. It's more understood as societal custom. And each Reconstructing Judaism community decides for itself what its norms are. Okay? Whereas in the conservative movement and in Orthodoxy, halacha and the system of halacha as it has developed over the centuries is a defining element of what it means to be a conservative Jew. What's different about conservative Judaism from orthodoxy is our willingness to change and evolve. Okay, so whereas orthodoxy will say Jewish law really stopped in the 1500s with the publication of the Shulchan Aruch, the main source of Jewish law for Ashkenazi and Sephardi Jews, published in the 1500s, first by Rabbi Joseph Karo, a Sephardic rabbi, and then by Rabbi Moses Isserles in Poland, an Ashkenazi rabbi. Karo and Isserles were working on their summaries at the same time. Karo finished first. Isserles saw a copy. Instead of Isserles publishing his own, he just added notes to Karo's work, and which are the Ashkenazi practice and law fit into the Sephardi book. So that makes the Shulchan Aruch really a global Jewish resource. For Orthodox, the evolution of Jewish law stopped at the Shulchan Aruch. Conservative Jewish law continues, because we say, why stop? Why randomly say that rabbis in the 1500s are better than rabbis today, and that tradition stops evolving? That's not how the conservative movement sees Jewish practice and Jewish life. We are an ever evolving and continually evolving movement. So that's why we have this Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, which, for example, 70 years ago, came out with a decision saying that it's okay to drive to synagogue on Shabbat. At the time, the way the law committee worked is that they they approved papers with a minority opinion, minority vote, or a majority vote. And if it had the requisite amount of votes, it would then either be a minority opinion or a majority opinion, and then each individual rabbi could decide for their community whether to follow the minority opinion or the majority opinion. And so the minority opinion was that it was allowed to drive to synagogue on Shabbat. Hence, every conservative synagogue today has a parking lot, and most people drive to synagogue on Shabbat. Okay, whereas in Orthodox synagogues, if they have a parking lot, which most of them do, it will be closed somehow on Shabbat, so that like Beth Shalom in Potomac, for example, that Orthodox synagogue has a chain across the entrance to the parking lot to prohibit people from driving to synagogue and parking there on Shabbat. That's not to say people don't drive to Beth Shalom on Shabbat. It just means that they won't park in the parking lot. They'll park in the neighborhood and be looking like they're walking to synagogue on Shabbat. But I'm not commenting further about the Orthodox denomination or Beth Shalom or anything like that. Just want to give an example of an issue that the Conservative Movement Law Committee would deal with. Today, the opinions are not officially majority or minority opinions. They are just opinions. And if you have the requisite amount of votes, it'll be published as a valid opinion of the conservative movement. A broad issue that was discussed more recently was in 2006, when the committee itself studied for a couple of years what to say about homosexuality, and mainly for rabbis officiating at homosexual marriages, and whether people who are homosexual could be rabbis and cantors, that is, leaders in the conservative movement. And they came out with the opinion in 2006, a resounding yes to all of that. Okay, so sometimes they'll take time, years, to discuss a broad issue like homosexuality, and sometimes it'll be less time required. But if you sit on the committee, you have to agree that at some point you're going to be the author of one of these papers. So in 2000, that leads us now to this paper written by Rabbi Daniel Nevins. So this was written in June. Well, it was accepted in June of 2019, so nearly 4 years ago. Okay, there have been advances in artificial intelligence in the past 4 years. In other words, Daniel Nevins had no idea about ChatGPT, but the broad issues of artificial intelligence are mentioned here. Rabbi Danny Nevins is a contemporary of mine. We overlapped in rabbinical school. I'm older than he is. He served as a pulpit rabbi in Detroit, and very, very talented guy. And after serving in the pulpit, he was appointed dean of the rabbinical school, which he served for 15 years, something like that, until last year, when he is now the head of school of a Jewish day school in West Orange, New Jersey. So he a very, very intelligent guy and very well spoken as well, and a very down-to-earth guy as well. So I'm just saying all this just because I know who Danny Nevins is, and so he was asked to write this paper, Halachic Responses to Artificial Intelligence and Autonomous Machines. Okay, so this is the basis for how to write such a paper is this. It has to start with a question, and then it goes to the response. Hence, it becomes the opinions, the papers of the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards become part of the bigger Jewish community literature over the centuries of responsa literature. And they get published in book form every now and then, but like I said, they're available on the web, on the Rabbinical Assembly website. The reference for this is within the Shulchan Aruch. So it's not just a new paper, but it's a paper in the context of the Shulchan Aruch, as Orthodox rabbis write their responses. Key figures in the Orthodox world are known as people who will answer halachic questions and will publish their answers. So they all will reference a source in the Shulchan Aruch for their paper. Okay, so this paper, so the Shulchan Aruch had no idea about artificial intelligence, right? So somehow the new topic, which 500 years ago, Rabbi Joseph Caro and Rabbi Moses Isserles could not in their wildest imagination have imagined such a thing being an issue for Jewish law, still there are broad topics there under which new topics can be associated. So artificial intelligence comes in the section. Shulchan Aruch is divided into 4 parts, and this part, HM, is Choshen Mishpat. Okay, so it's Choshen Mishpat, section 182, subsection 1. Okay, and 2019 is just how the Conservative Movement Law Committee puts it. So it's 182.1 is a section of Choshen Mishpat under which this paper falls. Okay, so the question is, with rapid advances in the development of artificial intelligence and autonomous machines, have come calls for moral machines that integrate ethical considerations into analysis and action. Okay, so in other words, the question is, the artificial intelligence questions ethics and morality. In other words, machines are being created to make choices, to do things that have ethical and moral implications, right? So there are machines that do surgery, right? So my son, who's a surgical resident, has worked such machines under the guidance of the chief resident or the attending surgeon in the operating room. But the machine can do an appendectomy, it can do a gallbladderectomy, it can be involved in knee replacement, etc. So that kind of machine doesn't necessarily have ethical or moral implications, right? The machine is being guided by a human doing that work, or might even do the work on its own. You program into it, start cutting and start removing, and it can do it for you. There's no ethical or moral implication. It's just doing a job. But what if you have a machine like ChatGPT that is writing an essay? There are ethical implications for that. Is there plagiarism involved, etc.? So depending on the purpose of the artificial intelligence, there will be no ethical or moral quandaries, or there will be some, or there could be a lot. Okay, so if there are ethical and moral implications, then what halachic principles should apply to the conduct of such machines? Okay, so what should we be thinking about? What kind of Jewish law issues would apply to artificial intelligence and autonomous machines? So these are the questions that Danny Nevins says are the questions. Are Jews liable for the halachic consequences of actions taken by machines on their behalf? And he gives as an example Sabbath labor. Now, I wouldn't have gone there. In other words, let me give you an example of what he means, right? Let's say you don't want to drive to synagogue on Shabbat, right? I don't drive at all on Shabbat, let alone to synagogue. Okay, so I am of the more traditional that Shabbat, as understood as a day of rest, that driving would violate that concept of the day of rest. Right. So Lori added also the perspective of the ChatGPT essays could raise ethical questions. Right. You could be a moral person and you could be writing, you could ask ChatGPT to write something immoral or unethical. And then, publish it, whatever. Okay. Yes. So now back to this. What are the other halachic consequences of machines acting on our behalf? So for Sabbath labor, driving, let's say you have a self-driving car, right? It still has to turn on. Okay, so for some people, using electricity on Shabbat is a no-no. But let's say you use electricity on Shabbat. So I understand, I don't have a Tesla, but I understand that if you own a Tesla, it comes with an app for your smartphone. So you can turn on your car just by using your smartphone. You just pull up the Tesla app and you go into it and turn on your car. You can turn on the heat. You can turn on the defogger. And theoretically, you can then punch in where you want to drive to, and it'll start driving. And it could also pull out of a parking spot and pick you up in front of the building. That I know for sure from somebody in the congregation who has a Tesla, who has done it, actually pulled the car out of the parking spot at shul and had it pull up to the indent in right in front of the sanctuary entrance, and to have it running. So if you can do all that and maybe you're not driving on Shabbat, theoretically, because the car is driving on Shabbat, and you are not doing the physical driving yourself. So would that, or are there halachic consequences then? Is that true that you wouldn't be violating Shabbat by doing that? Now, the paper goes on to other halachic, moral, ethical questions, like drones, right? So a lot of warfare today, just look at the war in Ukraine. A lot of that war is being conducted by drones. So somebody is sitting in a control room far away from the front, and then controlling the drone that is flying over the battlefield, and is then being told to shoot the weapons. You know, there are movies about this based on real life things. Like, I don't know, like the drones are used in Afghanistan, right, and other parts of the Middle East as well. So, you know, the U.S. soldiers could be sitting on a warship in the Persian Gulf, directing a drone that's flying in Afghanistan to then hit a terrorist target, right? And so the ethical issues are, and Israel has this issue too in dealing with the war in Gaza. So or the fighting terrorism in Gaza, and I believe it does use drones to do that. And then you're wondering, the ethical questions are, right? This drone is shooting under direction from some command center. Where is the terrorist? Is the terrorist all by him or herself? Is the terrorist inside an apartment building? And then you have the ethical, these are general ethical questions about warfare in terms of damage, collateral damage, if you want to put it that way. Human beings are going to get killed in order to kill this terrorist. How much collateral damage is allowed until it's too much collateral damage to get that terrorist? Okay, so these are ethical questions that have to be asked all the time in conducting war, right? So clearly Russia doesn't have these ethical questions when they're shooting at hospitals and schools or bus stops, train stations in Ukraine, right? So but those who want to conduct war ethically, if you can combine those two, they're not self-contradictory. These are the questions that you have to ask. Okay. Then question number 2 is, should ethical principles derived from halacha be integrated into the development of autonomous systems for transportation, medical care, warfare, and other morally charged activities, allowing autonomous systems to make life or death decisions? Right? In other words, whose ethics would it be that would be programmed into artificial intelligent machines? Okay, so we're not quite there yet where robots can make moral and ethical choices. But we're getting there. And these are questions that are being asked now. Then in 2019, less so, but more so 4 years later, that this is a major issue, and it's a new academic area of research and study as well in university, machine engineering. And so universities have ethical standards committees, especially for the areas of the university that conduct experiments on humans. Okay, so there's an ethics committee that has to meet to discuss a proposed experiment to see if it passes ethical muster before it's allowed to be conducted. Okay, so who are the people then, and what are the ethical parameters that would be going into designing the ethical intelligence for the artificial intelligent machine, right? So these are questions, it's a question that's under debate in Israel today, right? And not in terms of artificial intelligence, but in terms of society in Israel today. Whose society is it? Is the society, should societal norms in Israel be decided by people on the far right who represent so-called Torah true Judaism, so fundamentalist, ultra-right understanding of halacha? Should that be the law of Israel today? Or is there another level of ethical and moral understanding of halacha that should be the guide to making law in Israel? And so that's Israel, but it's America too. The Supreme Court justices who sit on the Supreme Court, our system is that whoever's in power and there's a Supreme Court vacancy, well, they're either a Republican or a Democrat who then is chosen to sit on the Supreme Court. Not talking about the politics of how that works, but rather the justices themselves have, so law then has a political perspective to it. Or if you want to take politics out of it, has a conservative or liberal kind of approach to it. So whose ethics, whose understanding of law goes into the design of the artificial intelligent machine? Okay, so you can understand now the complexity behind. I mean, it's difficult enough for society to agree, human beings in society to agree on a set of ethical and moral principles. Then apply that to a machine? Impossible. No, people can't agree on. So you can have a conservative with a small c artificial intelligent machine, and you can have a liberal artificial intelligent machine, right? So you understand the complexity here. So, for example, with medical care, right? Whose understanding of Jewish law would go into designing a machine that would make a life and death decision? Because some in Jewish law would say that it's okay to once a feeding tube has been inserted to pull out the feeding tube. Others would say, no, once a feeding tube is inserted, it has to stay in. This is when you're dealing with end of life issues. Or for an abortion. If you're in the South, well, okay, it's up until 5 weeks. But if you're in some other state, what are the issues with, let's say there's a machine that can conduct the abortion, right? So the question is, who is behind is the machine independently making a decision, or is there a human being behind the machine making the decision, who would then, that human being would be responsible for whatever the machine does, or is the machine independently responsible for what the machine does? Okay, so that's another aspect of this question, because then the machine, right? So, and then that leads to question number 3: might a robot perform a mitzvah or other halachically significant action? Is it conceivable to treat an artificial agent as a person, as a Jew? Let's say there are robots. There are robots that can vacuum the floor. But then there are robots that look like human beings that could actually become caregivers. So the day can come where you can buy a robot to dispense medicine, to help a person in and out of the shower, in and out of bed, to do cooking. So if that machine is doing all those human-like behaviors, and that machine is a human, it looks like a human, and the machine can talk and answer questions as if it's thinking about the answer before answering the question. Is it then, can you count it in a minion? That's question number 3. Can you count a robot like that towards a minion? So these are fascinating questions. All right, so I want to start, and so we're not going to have time to get into all this, and we'll continue next time. But let's just start with his introduction to the whole thing. So this is his response: the rise of artificial intelligence and the call for machine ethics. Let me just look at the chat, because there's there are also huge workers' rights issues raised by this. Will jobs be eliminated as well as poverty, and poverty be increased? Right. I mean, that's the question for. Well, so that's interesting if that's an ethical question, right? So there are hardly any toll booths on the highways left, right? Because we have Easy Pass, and even if we don't have Easy Pass, the thing that's above the highway takes a picture of your license plate, and you get something in the mail. So this reduces traffic when you don't have traffic jams, when you don't have toll booths anymore, right? Anybody who's driven on 95 through Maryland knows that you don't have a toll booth to get in and out of the Harbor Tunnel anymore. It's just smooth sailing. So what about all the people who used to work in the toll booths, right? So what about on the assembly lines of factories? Lots of that is automated now too. Cars, for the most part, for example, it's totally an automated system. So lots of now where it could be helpful is mining. All right, that's so let's get beyond the climate and environmental aspects of mining, but the people who actually are working in the coal mines get sick from the coal dust. So what if you could have robots doing the digging? Then who cares if a robot gets smashed and broken in the mine? It's just a machine. But the machine, and you don't have to worry about the machine getting sick, because the machine is doing the digging and hauling of the ore out of the mine. So the ethics could go both ways here. So yes, so Nevins is just narrowing down these questions, the variety of questions that we could have, into this narrow space of these topics here. Right, this goes back to when personal computers came on board and eliminated many secretarial and admin positions, since executives could do their own letters and scheduling. That's absolutely correct. That just my role here at the synagogue is case in point. When I was hired in 1994, remember, that's around the time that the internet was created, right? And things exploded then. In 1994, when I was hired, I had a full-time secretary. And that lasted for a year. And then the job was reduced to part-time. And so the secretary worked for me, but did other secretarial jobs around the synagogue, to the point now, so in other words, the secretary would answer the phone for me, would schedule appointments for me, would do other kind of correspondence for me. So correspondence, who writes letters anymore? Okay, so I do my own email. People call me. I hardly get phone calls anymore. It's all email. So as everybody knows who emails me, I'm pretty quick in responding to emails. And there are a few people who still use the phone, but it's really, really rare. So yes, all these secretarial positions have gone by the wayside. I think law offices still have them, and you still need paralegals, but lots of things are automated through software. Yeah, if you're doing a standard will, you probably need a lawyer just to make sure that the wording is right. But if it's a standard will with not much assets to have to disperse, I think you can just find that online, right? So lots of things are available through this, right? So let's do a little bit. It's 11:45. I just want to let's just read the beginning of his response, and then we'll call it a day. Among the extraordinary developments of our digital age, perhaps none is as startling as the introduction of smart machines that function without direct human supervision in an open and dynamic environment with the possibility of significant and even lethal consequences for people. Okay, a long sentence which says there are machines now that can operate independent of people. And if those machines are independent, they could then have lethal consequences for people. Think HAL on the 2001 Space Odyssey. Okay, so I didn't watch that whole movie, I don't think, at any one time, but if that, hopefully that's enough of a pop culture reference to know that the robot took over the spaceship with the astronaut, the human astronaut on board. Okay, potential lethal consequences there. An academic field of machine ethics has emerged, but there is no consensus about what type of ethical system, whether rule-based, consequentialist, or virtue, should guide the development of artificial intelligence. Okay, now what those three kinds of ethical systems are: rule-based, consequentialist, or virtue. Three kinds of ethical systems. Which one of those should guide the design of these artificial intelligent machines? And I just want to look at the footnote, and we'll call it a day here. The footnote is the machine ethics conversation began in science fiction literature with Isaac Asimov's 3 robot rules, first mentioned in his 1942 short story, Runaround. Now, Danny Nevins doesn't know this when he wrote this, but when he started researching, clearly from all the research on machine ethics or robot ethics, all referred to Isaac Asimov's short story from 1942. So clearly that's a basis for, like, the foundation for discussion about robot or artificial intelligence ethics. So what are the 3 rules that Isaac Asimov came up with? A robot may not injure a human being, or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. So think about also the robot on Lost in Space with the Robinson family, right? If you can picture that robot with swinging hoses for arms, right? So the robot, so you have a robot that can be proactive and do things, and a robot that can also be inactive and choose to be inactive. So the first rule of robots is that it can't choose to act or choose not to act if that choice will result in harm to a human being. Rule number 2, a robot must obey orders given it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. So if a human being told a robot to harm another human being, then the robot should not harm the other human being, because it would violate rule number 1, which is a robot cannot harm a human being. Number 3, a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. So just 3 laws, and you see how intertwined and complex the whole idea of artificial intelligence is. And then Asimov added a 4th law, which is a robot may not harm humanity or by inaction allow humanity to come to harm. So not just one human being, but all of the human community. Okay, so let's stop here for today. Any other questions or comments besides those that I addressed in the chat? Any other questions or comments before we call it a day?
How is it going to
Yeah,
stop?
go ahead, Bob. Yes, Bob.
Oh, I'm just concerned, kids have to write those essays for college entrances and
Right,
papers. And so many, I remember colleges have anti-plagiarism
right,
provisions.
right.
It's really going to test that, because I remember at one of my companies, we found somebody falsified a report
Uh-huh,
because we found the exact words online and we
right,
canned them immediately.
right. So I haven't attempted to write a a newsletter article for the Shofar yet, and I will attempt it, and I'll see what it comes up with. It might be that it's not plagiarism, that somehow ChatGPT uh, aggregates all material out there and writes something new.
But
As
it's not
opposed,
you,
what?
but it's not your words.
But that's the question. If you're asking it to do it, does it then become your words? Right? So that's the question. We'll talk about that next time, because what Nevin's focuses on is agency, right? It's so in other words, so a common form of agency is someone asking someone else to deliver, charity. So someone gives me $1 to put into the tzedakah box at the Kotel in Jerusalem. So I am that person's agent to perform the mitzvah of tzedakah. Okay, so that's the easiest, simplest form of agency around. So if I ask ChatGPT to write an article, yes, I'm not doing the intellectual hard work of writing it myself, but if I asked it to do it for me and it does it, it's still, is that considered my work or ChatGPT's work? So that's not, it hasn't been answered yet. And different schools in the area in Montgomery County, I think, are discussing this very topic. If they allow, if they put a broad ban on the use of ChatGPT, but I don't know how they're going to find out if somebody writes a paper in the end using it or not. I don't know. I don't know enough about ChatGPT to know whether you can tell right away that something has been written by it. But this is being discussed among educators, superintendents, and other education academics about the use of ChatGPT. Barbara.
Well, there's also, you got ghostwriters. How is ghostwriting different?
Well, because so there's plagiarism with ghostwriting, and then there's actually giving credit to the ghostwriter. Okay, so politicians hire speechwriters. Okay, so even though they don't give credit to the speechwriter, everybody knows that the politician has used a speechwriter. And then there's novels that are written, or historical memoirs, right? So I don't know, let's say LeBron James is going to write a biography. You know that he's not going to write it himself. He'll hire somebody to do it, but the cover of the book will say LeBron James memoir written by or co-authored by so-and-so. So then it's not plagiarism, you're giving credit. So it's only plagiarism if you're not giving credit.
But to what Bob was saying, you could also have, you're going to school and you're taking, and you have to write an essay.
Right. So it's up to each professor in the English department to know, to figure out that this person didn't write the paper. So if the person is stupid, in that I'm not doing any judgment. The person is stupid by writing his own papers first. Then the professor knows the style and then uses ChatGPT. I think it'd be pretty obvious, unless you tell ChatGPT, write it as a stupid person, right? Or as somebody who is not so sophisticated. Maybe you can help design how well something is written on it. So there are ways that professors have been able to figure out whether something has been written by the actual student or not. Right? So, yeah. So that's not an artificial intelligence issue. That's a real life person to
Yeah, well,
person
that's,
plagiarism.
but
issue.
it's
Yes.
part of the same
Yes.
thing. You're going to get a paper, you
Right.
have to decide.
And again, I don't know how professors and teachers will figure that out. Lori.
Yeah. No, it just seems like it could be a good starting place, like a research tool, to as part of your collecting information and perspectives. That
Right.
might,
Well, see, that's the internet, and that's the whole new tools. Right. Used to be when I was in college that if I were doing a research paper, I'd have to go to the card catalog, right? And then you remember what card catalogs were?
Yes.
To find books. And then you go to the Survey of Periodic Literature to look at articles that might have been published in academic journals, right? So, and certain classes would require a minimal amount of books and articles to be referenced in that particular paper that you're writing, right? So now with the internet, you don't need a card catalog anymore or a survey of periodic literature. That's what the internet is. So now there are new rules for high school research paper classes, right? People still have to learn how to write a research paper. There are new rules on how to access, whether you can use Wikipedia or not, right? That's a whole other question about Wikipedia itself. Can you trust information that you're reading, so-called truth of Wikipedia? Well, it depends. But then can you use a Wikipedia article, right? But back in the day, can you use an Encyclopedia Britannica article if you're doing writing a research paper, or does it have to be non-encyclopedia articles, right? So these issues of how to write and how to access information, that some of it has been around for a while. Yeah, so it's fascinating stuff. So we'll continue next time as we delve deep into some aspects of this. So have a good rest of the day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet.
yeah.